So today we're talking about a very sensitive and complicated topic. We're talking about IVF, the embryo disputes, and basically the key legal rights that are involved with these cases. Fedor, thank you so much for being here. This is such an important conversation. And I think a lot of people would be very, very interested to know about all of the things that are involved. So let's just follow up with some questions. Let's just start. We'll
Sure.
begin with the questions. So how common are these legal disputes involving these cases?
Well, it's not very common these days, but it's industry, I would say, that is growing every single day. There are many, many reasons to that. And one of the reasons is that when you have this kind of issue, at the beginning, obviously everyone's happy to have a child or to start a new life, or, it's a beginning. Obviously, the problems become when people go through either divorce or separation, or there can be many, many other things, such as a death of a spouse and a will, a trust that can be involved. So all of these things are very interesting. They're very challenging. We don't have a uniform rule or law or case yet in the United States. We talk a lot about Roe v. Wade, reproductive rights. Every time when president is elected, we always talk about it, but we never talk about the reproductive rights as far as IVA and surrogacy and embryos and things of those natures. So what happens these days is that all of these issues are viewed separately by the case law of a specific jurisdiction or specific state law. And in the state of Illinois right now, the controlling case is Katsap versus Katsap, which is a case that came from the Second Appellate Court Division,
Can you
and
tell
this
me
case belongs to this office.
Tell me what an appellate court is, because I think that just to the general public, what is it? So
Yes.
just so we can dull it down and make it a little bit less complex.
So in law, we like to divide things into jurisdictional issues, and there's administrative courts, there's trial court. So every case in Illinois that talks about divorce, embryos, child custody, child-related issues, always goes through the trial court first. Illinois has different counties. Each county has different court system, courthouses, and things of that nature. But it's a trial court. This is what we call the trier of fact. All divorce cases usually tried by a judge. A judge makes a ruling one way or another based on the evidence, based on the testimony, and things of those nature. Then if you don't like the decision, or if you want to correct the decision, you can file your appeal. An appeal is usually filed with the Court of Appeals. Again, Court of Appeals belongs to the jurisdiction where the initial decision came from. So that was the case of Katsap v. Katsap. The initial trial judge was in DuPage, and then we filed an appeal with the appropriate appellate court division. After that, you can go to Illinois Supreme Court, and after that, you can go to United States Supreme Court. All of the cases that I'm talking today about, including Katsap v. Katsap, were decided in Court of Appeals. It didn't go to Illinois Supreme Court. It's just with the Court of Appeals at this day, so it's not as ripe as we want to be, so the U.S. Supreme Court would decide.
It's really interesting. As I hear, there's a lot of complexity, it seems like, that is involved with these kinds of cases, legal complexities, but also emotional, because, you're dealing with, what people want to be a child, right? Or, to that point. Why do you think that these cases are so complex and so emotionally charged?
Well, emotional charge is, I think, kind of obvious, maybe not, but it's, you have a marriage, you have or maybe not a marriage, maybe you just couldn't conceive a child and you wanted to have a child, you always wanted to have a child, and now finally, after all these procedures that you have to go through with the clinic, because you have to remember that you have to go to a clinic through the process. And I think from the especially mother's perspective, it takes a lot of courage, a lot of time, a lot of financial support from the whole family. And when you finally go through, and sometimes from my experience, from what I heard is it might take several tries to have a child. And then when you finally have a child and you have the embryos that are still frozen, and you want to have another child in the future, and now what are you going to do? When the another DNA holder doesn't want them, he wants to destroy them, for example, donate them, and you cannot have a child anymore, and you really treat these embryos as your babies, even though under the law it's not, they're not considered to be human beings.
Yeah, and so from a legal perspective also, because I'm hearing the emotional perspective, but then there's a lot of complexity involved from the legal side. So why do you think that that's the case?
Huge, because and that's one of the reasons why the higher courts, such as Illinois Supreme Court or United States Supreme Court, didn't hear the issues yet, because the law develops as society develops. And right now in Illinois, for example, we use what's called balancing test. So we weigh the interests of two parties, the father and the mother. And again, I'm going to refer back to that Katsap case, because that's the last case on the issue. And the court looked at several factors: the age of the parents, the ability to have another child, who's paying for the rent, because you have to keep the embryos in the clinic, and other things. And they determined that those factors go for the mother. What it's also very complicated is that this is your DNA, right? And you have all sorts of constitutional rights. And the father, sometimes you don't want, if you don't have this relationship with a particular person anymore, you don't want your DNA to be somewhere else. And you probably don't want to pay child support. Or maybe you just, you don't want to have this feeling that out there somewhere there's your child and you cannot see him or her anymore, because you're no longer married to this person. In Illinois, we still have the law that if a child is born during the marriage, is presumed to be the child of the parents. So, what if you divorced, but your DNA is still out there and somebody else has a child?
Yeah. And that's where I feel like you're mentioning the common reasons why people end up in court. Like, what are the rights that each person typically has in these kinds of scenarios?
Well, now we applied our traditional custody rights. And again, we talk about traditional marriage, we can talk about same-sex marriage, and so when the child is born during the marriage, it's presumed to be the child of the parents, okay? And what if the child is born to a girlfriend-boyfriend relationship, or parties are divorced? Now we have a huge custody battle. And that's one of the things. We also have child support issues, and the court in the same case in Katsap said that if the father doesn't want to voluntarily acknowledge the child, he doesn't have to pay child support. So pretty much when you have a DNA and the mother wants to have a child and wants to go through the process again, or it's for the first time, and have a child, and the father says no, it's his right, but this is not his child anymore, and he doesn't have to pay child support. But now it's extremely difficult for the father to claim the child. And then I'll touch just briefly, that's why we also have all sorts of prenuptial agreements, postnuptial agreements, when people try to predict future, which is impossible. That's why I keep saying that all these prenups and postnups are good for only for several years. And then if you go too far from it, maybe they don't apply. But people try to discuss it in their agreements and things like that to determine, to answer your question, what rights they have for the child.
So how does this make it different than the traditional family law practice? I mean, is there kind of like a parallel where you're seeing where it might just be a child in a traditional method, and then basically comparing it to the method with IVF? Are the rights completely different, or does it just carry on like the same?
Same rights, same law, common law that came to us through years. And like I said, as society advances, we as lawyers and legislature trying to adopt and kind of move on. So it's the same thing pretty much. It's just the reproductive rights a little bit different as far as the birth of the child, but everything else is the same. If it's a single mom who has a child, she has 100% rights for the custody of the child. If that's DNA from the father who consented to have the child, now he can have the rights. But then remember that all of the agreements that people can have, that's why we are in courts a lot. And our firm, where we go to courts all the time for trials, for issues like that. And the reason why is because people breach their agreements all the time. So it doesn't matter what's in the paper, it doesn't matter what they agree to. You know, life goes on, changes, character comes in, and you know, that's why people need lawyers, I guess.
Right. Yeah. And there's so much complexity. People are complex human beings. You were mentioning the case that your most recent case, and without sharing any confidential details, I would love to understand why it was so important. Can you explain to us why?
Sure, and it's not as, you know, it's public, it's published. All the facts are out there. They've been presented at least twice during the trial. And also via public domain with the Court of Appeals. The importance of this case is that it was extremely important for the mother to preserve the embryos. She referred to them as her babies. And again, I understand the emotional part. I understand how it can be perceived from the legal perspective. Unfortunately, the embryos, as of today, not considered to be human beings. And the contract law applies. You have to pay pretty much rent. It's like for storage to keep them. You have to be up to date on that. And that was her. So she had a first baby through the embryo procedure, and very healthy baby, and everything went well. And she knew that she cannot have another child, and she was in divorce process with the husband. From my opinion, my perspective, the husband was just simply vindictive at her, towards her at that time. And that's why he wanted to destroy the embryos. For her, it was not acceptable. Unfortunately, the trial judge ruled against her. That's why we had to take this case with the Court of Appeals. She was very emotional about it because for her, she saw the connection between the child that she had at that time that was created through the embryos and the child and this embryos that she had potentially to have a brother or sister for him instead of, you know, destroying them. And fortunately, the Court of Appeals agreed with our position, and she maintained, she kept the embryos as long as she complies with all other contractual obligations with the fertility clinic.
Interesting. My question actually, and you mentioned a really interesting point, is that legally then, why is an embryo not considered human?
It's not, the embryo is not considered to be a human. And there's a lot of law about it, and this is the law. It's such a huge political debate as far as the reproductive rights and things of that nature, abortion rights and things of that nature. The courts, you know, keep changing the law based on what I studied many years ago in law school and what we have now. It keeps changing. Again, society is changing and everything is changing. I cannot tell you right now. This is a decision of the, you know, lawyers live by the rules.
Right.
I have to live by the rules. Despite my personal opinions, embryos, as of today, not considered to be human beings.
Is there like a legal language involved? Like, you know, does it typically state why it would not be? Or is it just, what was the ruling? Was there a precedent beforehand?
There are a lot of precedents with the United States Supreme Courts about it. There were, and they usually all deal with the rights for abortion and things like that. And it's really a hot debate. And just recently, there were some changes in the opinions within the United States Supreme Court as far as the abortion rights and things like that.
Interesting. So, you know, in terms of the clients that you are getting and what you're seeing within the just anybody involved in this demographic, what are people misunderstanding most about these kinds of rights, the embryo ownership and legal rights that are involved with that?
Well, it goes back to the basics as far as the custody law goes and things like that. But it's also, the difference is also that it always involves some kind of contractual law. So it's always not just the reproductive rights, not just the custody and things like that, but it's also contracts that people make with each other or with the clinic, or what to do going forward. So we had several cases when couples actually had amicable divorce and they had embryos stored in the clinic. But now at the end of the divorce, if it's amicable, you have to have a custody agreement. And that's what makes it interesting and a little bit more challenging, is that usually with the children involved, you would have what's called allocation judgment. Who's making decisions on behalf of a child, parenting time, child support, things like that. Now, besides children, you have the embryos that's stored in some clinic that potentially can become a child, okay? And courts usually prefer at the end of the divorce procedure to have everything be final. So people don't come back and revisit the same issue and things like that. With embryos, it's virtually impossible. Doesn't matter how many agreements people can make, life goes on, something can happen, and if you agree to have an embryo, a child born from the embryo down the road, you can change your mind because you have a different family, because you moved, because, I don't know, things happen. Or you don't want to have a child now, something happened in your life, and you really want to have a child. You can also donate the embryos too to other couples that cannot have a child. So that's mostly what's challenging. It cannot just be put in the four corners of the agreement. And to answer your question, that's what usually people don't understand, because during the divorce, they want to get it done and forget about it and move on with their life, which is understandable. But it's kind of hard sometimes to do.
Especially when another life is involved. So
Yes.
I can see that, and so typically, I mean, when people go into even a marriage, right, a lot of times you're not really thinking about, when we divorce, who does the child go to? So at what point, even getting IVF, right, or that scenario, people aren't typically thinking about it. At what point should you actually get an attorney involved in this process?
Well, it's always when something, it's always when the divorce breaks down. I mean, when divorce happens, when the marriage breaks down. In the example that I was talking today, when they got married, and it's usually people didn't know that they cannot have a child for whatever reasons. So it was a mutual decision by both a husband and a wife to have these embryos. And remember, this is not, this is a very expensive procedure. It takes time, it takes commitment from both parents, and it takes a lot of money. So when they make this decision, obviously they wanted to invest in their future. They moved together, I think, to a different state. They stayed together up until they had a child, and the child, after the birth of the child, they were all happy, and nobody, of course, was thinking about anything else up until the time of the divorce. And then when the time of the divorce, during the divorce, and again, and I think this is going to be not only their example, but every single example of people that go through divorce. I think fathers who can conceive, who can have a child later on, would always want to get rid of the DNA. You're done. You want to move on.
Right.
And you don't want to leave your DNA behind. And you don't want to live with this thought in the back of your mind that there's a child somewhere who's going to call you in about 15, 20 years and say, hey, Dad, right? So, and then at the same time, you don't want to be responsible. You don't want to pay child support. Maybe you have a different life. The mothers would be always attached to their kids, to her kids, and she would want to have another child. So these are two conflicting sort of um, minds. And then if you take in consideration same-sex marriages, it can also be extremely difficult because you have a marriage, you have a child from a different DNA, and then now we're talking about a third-party DNA most likely, and now it's difficult. This is my DNA, is this your DNA, and what are we going to do in the future? Who's going to pay for this,
Right.
and things like that.
So are you finding situations where people they're signing agreements, but they don't really understand what the legal consequences are in that matter?
That happens a lot.
Wow.
People rush to conclusions. And that's the job of a lawyer, sort of kind of, slow the process down and explain it word by word. But even then, because usually divorce is very emotional procedure. Sometimes it's even more emotional than getting married. People rush to get divorced, and sometimes they want to get divorced. When you're getting married, they ask you to take time. You have to buy a license. You have to wait until you actually can go to court and say I do, and things like that. During the divorce, people try to get it done. Sometimes because divorce happens over years, people grow apart from each other, things like that. That's why Illinois legislature also has this provision that you have to live separate and apart for at least 6 months to make sure that you really want to get divorced, you really put everything on the paper, you really want to sign it. But clients, people who live out their real life, they want to move. Somebody get a job. I want to be done. I want to move back to the country I'm coming from. I want my child to go to private school and he is not allowed. Things like that. So there are many different reasons why people rush to sign papers.
Interesting. So are there legal mistakes that become really legally expensive and emotionally devastating later on?
Legal mistakes are always expensive and legal devastating later on. It depends, really. If we're talking about legal mistakes during signing of the contract, or we're talking about legal mistakes during the course of a trial, what I think is mostly important is that people should really think about what they want to put in the paper before they finalize the divorce. One of the reasons is that there's a law that you cannot go back at least 2 years after signing the papers, go back and say, I changed my mind, or I want to do this. Unless there's some kind of significant change in the circumstances, you have to live with the agreement, and you have to work it out with the other side. That's another thing that is very important if we're talking about embryos, we're talking about custody, if we're talking about anything else. If there are children involved, you still have to communicate with the other side for the best interest of the child.
So how are the courts currently dealing with the state of these frozen embryos? What are the approaches to, are they, are the disagreements, are there a lot of them? How are the courts approaching it?
So the embryo is considered to be property. That's one of the things. It's a property, and you have to pay for the storage. You have to deal with the out-of-state, sometimes clinic, and pay them rent. And if you don't, just like with the eviction law or anything else, the embryos will be evicted, could be destroyed. It's all based on the contract that you sign with the embryo clinic. So there's another contract out there. We can talk also about surrogacy at some point. That involves completely different structure, with and it's a different agreement. But with if we talk only about the embryos, that's a contract law with a third party, which is a clinic. It's also probably wise to have insurance, by the way, for the embryos. And it's also an agreement with your custodial parent or spouse as far as the rights to the embryos. So you need to decide. So if you have a child, you're making the decision as far as the well-being of a child going forward. Child support, things like that. If you also have embryos, you have to take in consideration what are we doing with the embryos, because they can be stored for indefinite period of time, as long as you pay rent. But at some point, somebody has to do something with the embryos, and you two have to decide what to do.
Hmm. Do you find that people sometimes in certain situations have waited too long to get legal advice?
It's hard to say. It depends on the circumstance. Sometimes things happen very rapidly, very fast. Like I said, the divorce can be very emotional and very kind of fast developing, or it can be a very thought through procedure between people. So it's hard to say. It depends on the character, how you approach it, what caused the divorce, and what are you really looking for in the future, as far as getting legal advice. I think it's always wise to have a legal advice. Again, if you feel uncomfortable, or if you don't feel secure in your current state, you probably should have some kind of advice.
Agreed. Yeah. So, what do you think legally couples should be discussing before they even start to explore the IVF situation?
The one that they start, or the one where they?
What should they be discussing?
I don't know. If the couple wants to have a child, they probably should be discussing what color of the walls they should paint their bedrooms.
True.
If it's a boy or girl, it's the same procedure as having a child. It's different, but the expectation, the excitement, and they probably should not be worried about legal procedures in the future. I think if people worried what's going to happen at the time when they start this whole procedure, they probably should not have a child.
Yeah, that's true.
To begin with. But they have to, if you want to have a child via embryo, you got to talk a lot about, with the clinic about the procedures, the insurances, the securities, the expectations, and things like that. I think the lawyer involvement at that point should be minimal. You could put something in the prenuptial agreement, probably, but it'll be a little bit difficult. It's mostly maybe postnuptial. Once the child is there, you can put something in the paper. But when you start the whole process, I think the main focus should be on the clinic.
So, last question before we go. What advice would you give somebody, a family, or anyone that is starting to approach issues and disputes regarding the embryo IVF scenario, where there's some kind of hesitation or some dispute happening?
Well, my approach is always, you need to be able to discuss things. That's one of the things that people don't do. I understand why. But I think if you live together 10, 15, 20 years, sometimes you should be able to discuss things. Doesn't matter how difficult or unpleasant it is. If you go through legal system, that should be when you exhausted all reasonable options to resolve these things. I think the best approach, if you discuss everything within the family, then go to your lawyers and they put everything on the paper and you're done. If you go to litigate, then you would have to litigate, and then you would need to deal with the decisions that would be made by someone on your behalf. The issue with the embryos, the main issue with the embryos is, of course, the future of the embryos. And again, there's nothing is indefinite in this life, and you need to have a clear understanding what's going to happen. Even if you're a perfectly fine couple and you live together, there are some embryos out there that you need to make a decision at some point if you will keep paying for the storage forever, donate them, or destroy them. That's a decision that you need to make to begin with. If you really want to have a child, then obviously you need to set out the budget and look forward to that process and that procedure, whatever it takes. But this is the decision that you usually have to make, because it's always several embryos. It's never one or two, so it can be a dozen. If you want to have 1,000 children, God bless. But if you don't, you need to make a decision.
True. Well, thank you so much for your time today. Very enlightening. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Great. Should we do? All right.